Since the pandemic lockdown, school boards across the country have become political battlegrounds over mask mandates, vaccines, and reopening guidelines.
These are our kids, not yours! Where are yours?
It's time to recall this board.
No control!
In San Francisco, the fights have had a unique twist. The school board there had voted to rename 44 schools whose names they said were tied to historical injustices. A lot of people were unhappy this was happening during the pandemic while schools were still closed.
As far as we can tell, they didn't open any, biographies on any of these people. And there were famous historical figures that they literally only considered for a few seconds.
And it doesn't stop there. In early 2021, people were outraged after tweets made by Allison Collins, a Board of Education commissioner, were shared widely. In those tweets, Collins said Asian Americans use white supremacist thinking to get ahead. And there was a backlash. The mayor and many local leaders called for her to step down. Amy Chang was a high school senior at the time.
If you do not want racist tweets to be used against you for political reasons, then do not make racist tweets.
Now 3 members of that school board are facing a recall vote, but many of the students in the district won't get a say. They can't vote. And that's something young people in San Francisco tried to change.
We are fighting back against crises at a scale no other generation has ever seen.
And we need the power of the vote to make our voices count now.
My generation simply does not have the privilege not to be politically engaged.
In 2020, Ellie Lerner campaigned for a proposition to extend voting rights to 16 and 17-year-olds in San Francisco. The measure would apply to local candidates and ballot measures.
I think that kids are so incredibly involved, and especially during the pandemic, have realized the failures of the education system and are demanding greater action and greater voice.
Ellie has been politically engaged since middle school, when she began to feel the direct effects of climate change.
This is the Kmart shopping center. This is Kmart burning up.
In 2017, the Tubbs fire swept through cities like Santa Rosa, where her grandmother lived.
Luckily, she was able to get out in time, but the area around her house completely burned down in Santa Rosa. And we had several other family and friends have to come and stay with us.
House is burning, looks like on the north side of the road. Lots of them.
At the time, it was the most destructive wildfire in California history.
Just seeing the devastation across the state, and I also have asthma, so struggling to breathe for several days and realizing that this was only going to continue.
She saw how the decisions politicians were making directly impacted her future, and that pushed her to demand a greater voice in the political system. But not everyone agreed with her. In fact, in 2016, San Francisco voters rejected the measure to lower the voting age. Ellie campaigned for it again in 2020, and it was rejected again.
I actually talked to a few adults who did vote against it. Their main concern was that kids do not have to pay property taxes, and so, we're not as invested or wouldn't really be educated enough to vote on topics concerning property taxes particularly.
But then, not everyone owns a home in San Francisco.
There are plenty of people that don't, and we still grant them the right to vote.
On another level, Ellie says adults are afraid of a fundamental shift, that the status quo would be disrupted if kids could vote. She voted in her first national election in 2020.
Young Americans are energized and highly engaged in this election. More than 1 million voters aged 18 to 21 have cast their ballots early.
People often assume young voters are apathetic, but according to an analysis from the website 538, the core of the issue is feeling disenfranchised from politics. Young people are much more likely to report barriers to voting than older people.
Like people on social media, they'll post a picture of them and their ballot, them and their I voted sticker.
So it's almost like you feel a little peer pressure to vote?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
According to research from Tufts University, the 2020 election featured one of the highest rates of youth voting since the voting age was lowered to 18 in 1971.
We are certifying the 26th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. That amendment, as you know, provides for the right to vote of all of our young people between 18 and 21. 11 million new voters as a result of this amendment.
That was during the Vietnam War, when young people were old enough to fight but not old enough to vote. Now, decades later, the efforts to lower the voting age are local. Youth in San Francisco pushed to lower it before, and there are no signs they won't try again. For Philosophy Talk, I'm Holly J. McDede.